All right. Well, welcome back from lunch, everybody. Hope you guys are all nice and full. We have the best type of dessert for you. More cybersecurity talk. As Jen just previously mentioned, we're about to get into our next panel. This one will be the cloud security and zero trust panel. Before we jump into things, I wanted to give everybody a quick opportunity to introduce themselves. Let's start with Kareem, who you guys may recognize from earlier, and then work our way around.
Hi everyone, it's my mic. Okay. It's a bit more on the low side. So good afternoon again, everyone. Kareem Bennett with MDS, Senior Cloud Security Architect. Nice to speak with you again.
Hello, everybody. I'm Camila Martins. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Microsoft, and I specialize in network security.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Tejeda. I've been with MDS 3 years, Senior Cloud Consultant.
Hey everyone, I'm Sumi. I'm a Principal Product Manager with Microsoft Security Engineering CXC, focused on Entra.
All right. Well, thank you guys for a quick introduction. As we jump into a new topic today, let's start with a basic question for the panel. How is zero trust defined in the current cybersecurity landscape, and where do organizations stand in terms of adoption? Let's go left to right. Kareem, wanna kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So how I view zero trust. So zero trust is not something new. Zero trust has been a concept for over a decade. I think what has really changed is in terms of market dynamics. So a lot of vendors, any new solution that comes out, any new product, it's quickly labeled as a zero trust solution. But zero trust goes much further than that. Zero trust is not something that you could purchase off the shelf. It's not a specific product. Zero trust is a security strategy, one that basically works on the premise of you always assume breach and you follow the principles of never trust until always verify. Now, when it comes to in terms of the adoption of zero trust, I am a bit 50-50 on it. A lot of the organizations that I meet with, they say they do zero trust, but it's just an aspect of zero trust. It may not be all the different layers that they are looking at and the process and the procedures that goes with it. So for the most part, I think how we approach zero trust has to be something very methodical, and organizations that are adopting zero trust, they need to look at it at a whole bigger picture. A study that I was looking at this year in terms of Gartner, what Gartner was saying, and I tend to agree with as well, is that they were saying most organizations are not doing zero trust. And by probably 2025, at least 50% or 60% of organizations will now starting from the zero trust framework as a beginning. Currently, as it is now, it's currently measured at less than 1% that organizations are currently following that whole zero trust security strategy. But on the bright side, I am seeing a lot of customers more interested in starting zero trust from the very foundation, starting it correctly and further adopting it. I think what is important too is when we look at zero trust, it needs to be paired at just not looking at it as a destination. Zero trust is a journey, and it's something that you need to have a maturity model to follow along with as well.
I was just going to say, very well said.
Very nice.
Camilla, you want to pick up?
Sure. I historically zero trust concepts just started around networking security when things were a little simpler, right? So it absolutely the concept that you have can be applied across the board, apps, data, network, etc. But I think everybody heard about zero trust a lot, and we know exactly a lot of those concepts, like Karim just shared. What I wanted to chime in about the adoption is how difficult it is sometimes for customers or businesses to prove how trying to adopt or bringing in that zero trust mindset actually translates into value for their business. So this is where I think it's valid to really pace yourself as zero trust. Say, I want to take my projects forward and my business forward with that zero trust mindset, to pick and choose and see how that comes as a return to you. It's very challenging actually to justify zero trust efforts. This is what I see happening, and this normally is my mindset when I try to work it through and decide what we should invest on or not to achieve that.
Yeah, we all know the definition, right? We've been hearing it all day. So I'd like to chime in on the adoption part. And just a suggestion on my end is, start small, see where you're most vulnerable, and take it from there. Because from my point of view, security, zero trust, right, it's going to become a de facto standard in our organizations and environments.
Um, and finally, I think such great points across the board. I think the thing to also keep in mind is that the goalposts are moving constantly. We're seeing new types of attacks, new types of threats all the time. And so, at least from a Microsoft point of view, our investments in generative AI, in security copilot, should be seen as a way for us to sort of keep our platform, give you the power to sort of stay on top of those trends and all of those latest threats. So just want to sort of finish that off with what's I think in the future, and so you have an idea of what we're thinking about, because this is a super important problem of our time.
Yeah, absolutely, and very well said by everybody. As we continue down the list, Kareem, we're going to start with you on this one, so I'm going to give you a second to think before I finish the question. But what would you say have been the key drivers for organizations in moving towards a zero trust security model?
Right. So when we talk about the key drivers for zero trust, I think you could look at it from two perspectives. The first perspective is a business driver, and the second perspective is a security driver. So now touching on the business driver, I think we need to look at revenue protection. So security is not a revenue generating function of the business, right? The goal of security within our business is to support the business functions. So where revenue protection comes into place is that if you effectively implement a zero trust architecture or zero trust strategy, you are essentially limiting the impact of an incident that could happen within the organization. You could limit, for example, the financial liability. You could minimize brand damage, reputation, etc. So we need to look at it from that perspective, from a revenue protection. The other place I see from a business perspective where zero trust really comes into place is when you look at workforce agility, right? During COVID, a lot of organizations needed to adapt. They needed to transform. They needed a way of enabling remote workers to perform, to continue the job. And what that really caused is that security needed a way, and the business needed a way to enable those users. So what happened there? What happened was we had a lot of organizations rushing to create those type of solutions and enable those type of technologies. For example, VPN concentrators. We had organizations creating servers within the cloud with RDP exposed and so forth. So that really caused a lot of security incidents, doing it wrong too quickly, and security needed to go back to the board to really say, well, how do we do this correctly? And I think Dashboard Zero Trust is really an excellent use case with things like following those principles of assuming breach, limiting access, and basically continuous verification. Zero Trust network access also played a phenomenal aspect in allowing those remote workers in as well. Now there are some other items. If you look at from the security perspective, if you follow zero trust and if you follow zero trust correctly, essentially what you are doing is limiting the impact of a breach. You are limiting that attack surface, because we know with cloud technologies, when you start implementing many different sort of services, microservices, etc., you're going to expand your attack surface. And I think there's what zero trust is really an excellent use case as well, and something that really helps you to have that strong security posture.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you bring up some good points in terms of some key drivers. I wanted to open it up to anybody else on the panel if you'd like to chime in terms of what you've been seeing for key drivers in organizations, both on the Microsoft side and from the Daniel Tejada's perspective.
Yeah, I can chime in. Just in terms of some statistics, right? The biggest attack vector that we've seen is from an identity perspective, right? All those password spray attacks, all sorts of like so many of the, I mean, pretty much every attack has some sort of connection back to identity. And so securing identity is super important if you were to think about zero trust. So from a Microsoft point of view, our stance has been consistent that as we've progressed from the days of, where there was perimeter-based security, our devices are, one user to many devices. From a data perspective, we access data on so many different, from so many different sources. Like think of those apps, think of those servers. Like it's just gone, like there's so many different sources. From an apps perspective, again, there's SaaS apps, there's apps on premises, there's apps that you still have custom apps, right? But the one thing that is, and even from a network perspective, we're no longer working within a perimeter. So that's just a given that, we've got home Wi-Fi's, all kinds of things to talk about, like we spoke about remote, etc. So when we sort of thought about zero trust, we realized pretty quickly that the foundation of zero trust has to be sort of identity, and then everything else builds from that. Even some of the, like our latest sort of announcement around network security that, maybe Camilla can add, is also identity centered for exactly that reason. So as you're thinking about zero trust, where our guidance is that, stay true to identity, secure that on a priority basis. The rest sort of flows from there. But again, it's a strategy. It's constantly evolving. So staying on top of identity is probably a great idea and a great starting point.
Yeah, I agree there regarding since COVID, right? This whole workforce is all remote, and the perimeter has now changed, and the new perimeter now is identity, right? So protect your identity.
Yeah, and I think with the common theme today being cybersecurity in general, cloud security, zero trust, there's still a ton of organizations out there who are adhering to traditional security models. In your opinion, Camilla, what steps are recommended to transition towards a zero trust model?
Yeah, the traditional security model is difficult because even companies that want to transition away from their traditional security model, even if they want to modernize, it's not that easy, right? So I get a bunch of bank branches out there that need to then change how those branches connect. Not an okay task. So the efforts to modernize are happening, and they have to be phased out. If they don't modernize, they're going to be susceptible to threats that they may not be able to address. But that transition has been happening with tooling like today Barracuda Hero is explaining with their SASE model, Microsoft entering the market with our Microsoft Security Service Edge model, plenty of other providers out there. It has to do with picking your applications, picking the type of access that you find to be either most vulnerable or most critical that could have huge impact with you, in performing phased approaches of migration, right? So you select a group of people, you go through your proof of concept, you go through a pilot, and then you start to grow into that new modernized model. The idea of just saying, hey, let me lift and shift this whole thing, too much impact, especially if it impacts user experience, because then you have a workforce that doesn't know what to do, how to work, always phased, and keep up with the modernization as possible. Obviously, there's partners that can help, right, with the road mapping and saying, hey, you start from here. This is going to be your timeline for growing. But that's how we see this working.
Yeah, it's actually like Camilla read my mind. I was going to say, as a company who deals with a number of different organizations with a focus in security, such as MDS, from your perspective, Daniel, Kareem, what would you guys say to a customer or an organization who's using a traditional security model and looking to move towards that next step?
Well, for me, the tools, which is I mostly work with, are cloud native tools. And these are things that should start be used. So things like Defender for Cloud, which can measure your security posture management, find any gaps, find any compliance or regulation gaps. So those are things that are important. Monitoring, right? A lot of businesses don't have that enabled, logging, and you have a breach and then you don't know what happened. Yeah, that.
All right, perfect. So just to follow up on both points, I think what is really important for zero trust is assessment. So you need to understand where the current gaps are, and it's important too that you get started and you get started quickly to not get left behind. A lot of organizations suffer from analysis paralysis, which is going to really slow down the entire process of shifting across, right? And Camilla was mentioning too in terms of why some companies have to modernize. I mean, there's so many different use cases we could talk about, like mergers and acquisitions, etc. These things are forcing companies to establish zero trust. But what is really important about zero trust, because it's a security strategy, what needs to be done is proper communication. Can't stress that enough. You really need to communicate with your users because it's a shift in how the organization does security. You need to communicate well. It's a cultural shift, meaning that users they will be transitioned to a more security-minded set of folks that you have working for you. So they need to be very security aware. So I think that is really important. What is really important as well from the traditional, moving to the traditional onto the modern side of things is having that maturity model in place, right? One thing that you will hear with zero trust anytime you're like having a discussion with zero trust is that zero trust in itself is not a destination. Zero trust is a journey, and within that journey, you have to continually assess. You have to continually mature as you go along.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one anecdote. So, in like Microsoft, as you can imagine, like we've got a whole lot of employees, and the importance of communication, like I couldn't agree more. But one of the ways that our learn team sort of did a really good hack was for the employees. There's a security training that is like a soap opera. So it's got, folks who are working in Microsoft, but, who come across data issues, and there's a whole lot of drama around it. And there's diversity and inclusion and, all those topics which are covered over there. And, this is like so popular within Microsoft that this month we have a campaign. It's called the Give campaign. This is where Microsoft donates or volunteers for a whole lot of charities worldwide and causes we believe in. But one of the hottest bid auction items there is a role of a character in that soap opera. So there's a whole lot of a great way to communicate. To make it real, but also help folks understand what role they play in the organization's security. So couldn't agree more.
Perfect. Thank you, Sumi. And speaking of soap operas, we're going to keep up with your audition here. We can put it on tape. But in your opinion, Sumi, I'm going to start with you. How crucial is identity and access management in securing customer environments? Action.
Yeah. So I think just just to like summarize what I mentioned earlier, right? There's always like 5 dimensions to think about this: identity, devices, network, apps, and data, right? And like I mentioned, in the old world, it was the network perimeter that was the most important because that was one perimeter. You had one place where folks would come, they would work. If you had that secure, you were good. But that's no longer the case. Other than identity, everything else is now multiple. This is not to say that, you know, back then we didn't have MFA. We did have MFA. We did have passwords that were protecting, you know, those devices, access to those devices, access to those apps, access to that data. But you know, that fundamental security was measured by the quality of your network security. So similarly, that fundamental measure of security is measured by how strong you're protecting your identities. So from a Microsoft perspective, like we've been investing very steadily, like, you know, by now it's billions of dollars from an R&D perspective to make our access management, identity and access management solution strong. Just a quick show of hands around the room. How many of y'all are familiar with Microsoft Entra and can confidently speak to it for 5 minutes? I know you can, John. Okay, all the hands went down. So think of Entra as our, actually, let's go back, right? Again, given that importance of identity, given how security is changing all the time because the threat landscape is changing all the time, and that importance of identity from a devices, apps, network, a data perspective, we announced a sort of, you know, we felt we needed to announce a more broader vision, and Azure AD was simply not cutting it for so many reasons, right? It's not AD in the cloud. If there are folks here who still think it's AD in the cloud, you know, hopefully this gets through to you. It was never AD in the cloud. And so Entra sort of our way of, number one, thinking about identity from 3 different buckets. There's the traditional identity and access management bucket. This is, you know, your identity management. This is identity governance, identity security, or you know, your external IDs, your B2B, your B2C use cases. The second bucket is emerging categories. Super exciting stuff around decentralized IDs, right? You just cannot ignore those use cases anymore. And it is the gold standard in terms of really knowing people are who they say they are, as well as permissions management, again, cutting across the multi-cloud, going across there. I feel like, John, I may be, you know, trespassing on your content a little bit there. Yeah. Yeah, I think that'll make it a lot easier. And then we've also got to think about workload identities. So we've got, you know, yet another solution there. So that's bucket number 2, emerging categories. And then super important, network security. Like I said, we've taken a stance that we announced in July this year about having an identity-centered secure access service edge solution. And if you need any details on that, like Camilla's your girl, you should talk to her. I'm sure she'll be happy to talk about this topic. But you know, just thinking about like this was not the way people thought about identity earlier, and this sort of summarizes where we're headed with identity. And I haven't even spoken about like, you know, AI and the role it's going to play across the board. But this is how it is.
Yeah, AI has been a common theme here today in the cybersecurity world. Lucky for you guys, or unlucky, I don't really have any AI questions specifically for today, but I would like to give an opportunity in case anyone else would like to expand on the identity and access management piece. Daniel, looks like.
Yeah, I just want to chime in, right? Because as we said, identity is very important, and we're still seeing accounts out there with no MFA enabled and things like that. And you know, you should be tying your identity with conditional access policies and things like that, and not just tying them. You know, there are gaps in conditional access that should also be evaluated. So those are things that are crucial and important with identity.
All right. Well, as we talk about identity and access management, we talk about networking, we talk about all the different pieces that compose cloud security as a whole. Kareem, in your opinion, how are organizations addressing the security challenges inherent in operating within a cloud environment?
Yes, I think there's number of ways to answer that. But the security challenges within the cloud, it really varies from organization to organization. However, there are some commonalities that I see, and some commonalities that are very publicized. I think the first one that we could discuss is cloud misconfigurations. Cloud misconfigurations is still a huge deal, and there's a number of reasons for cloud misconfigurations. I guess we could spend the whole day talking about it. But the key takeaways for cloud misconfigurations, I think that a lot of companies are still trying to just move directly into the cloud with the traditional data center security type mindset. And that just doesn't work. So when you start looking at cloud security, you need to have a proper mapping of what those roles in the cloud is going to look like. Additionally, where organizations fall short is that they don't understand the cloud shared responsibility matrix, meaning that what is the cloud provider responsible for and what is the cloud consumer responsible for? Because once you don't understand that, it really gives way for a huge interpretation, and interpretation could be very expensive. You could suffer a serious breach because you thought, hey, Microsoft was responsible for this, or Google was responsible for this, or AWS was responsible for this. So how we see organizations approaching it now is in a very methodical way, and I think it's because of the publicity that data breaches are getting, and also from the information that the cloud providers are providing. So we have organizations now coming to MDS, and before they move forward with a cloud journey, before they migrate any workloads into the cloud, or further adopt further workloads, the first thing they want to know is, what is your methodology? It's something that is frequently asked. Um, Boards are demanding or requiring, before we move forward, or before they move forward with a cloud implementation, they need to see that structure in place. They need to see a framework. And this is something that is really important. And this is one of the way that companies are approaching cloud security from, and trying to really mitigate against the effects of misconfigurations. So every major cloud provider has a framework. You could work with partners, strategic partners, to help shape that framework to meet your business and security requirements. Microsoft has the cloud adoption framework, the well-architected framework. There are different frameworks by different vendors as well. The next issue, the next security challenge that I see very prevalent is lack of visibility. Now, we no longer live in a world where it's just on-premise alone. You have hybrid cloud, you have multi-cloud. And one of the issues that a lot of companies have is that lack of visibility, right? So you have many different ways and many different reasons that you go into the cloud, right? One of them, or even going to multi-cloud, one of them will be to diversify, right? You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want to be as diverse. You want to use the best of breed solutions. But there's a cost to that. The cost is visibility. And from a zero trust perspective, when we think about it, zero trust is really dependent on having full visibility of the environments. So when we talk about multi-cloud, you need to have that visibility end to end, from a security posture perspective, from a threat protection perspective, and even from a compliance perspective. Because if you don't have that, you run into a lot of difficulties to really deal with. So how I see customers and how we deal with it, and I mean, there's different tools that you could utilize. There's the Funder for Cloud that Daniel mentioned, that gives you that visibility from a threat protection perspective across multi-clouds, protecting your servers, your data, and so forth. But I also see it from the identity perspective in terms of how you deal with permissions management. And there's what Microsoft Entra is going to come in place to try to give you a full view of the environment and to manage your environment consistently from end to end.
Yeah, Kareem, and I think you bring up some good points and probably stole some thunder away from Daniel over there. But Dan, I would like to give you an opportunity to give us your perspective on how organizations are addressing the security challenges operating within a cloud environment.
Yeah, so I would say from my point of view would be Defender for Cloud, right? Because Defender for Cloud is the cloud security posture management, but it's much more than that. We have DevOps security now, so we have repositories out there with passwords exposed and things like that, and tools like Defender for Cloud can help find those things. Same thing with cloud workload protections, finding any infrastructure in the cloud with exposed ports, so things like that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We're going to give Dan, we're going to give you and Kareem a little break here. We're going to shift the focus over to Microsoft. Sue me not to put you on the spot, but in your opinion, how is Microsoft advancing its cloud security initiatives in alignment with zero trust principles?
Yeah, we're actually, I think, the 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 big news, of course, is our investment from a generative AI perspective, and that's sort of stolen the thunder across the board on every Microsoft solution there is, like every Microsoft cloud solution there is. So in March this year, we announced the Microsoft Security Copilot, which is our generative AI solution in the space. Microsoft Security Copilot sort of works across, I think, the Defender for Cloud, the XDR capabilities, etc. And so, I think that's going to be a constant theme. And the way it's going to help is to make it really simple for folks, right? And that's the benefit of generative AI anyway, in terms of, say, guided incident reports, helping folks to train, say, your analysts to how to hunt down and how to really go through a threat and see what are all the sort of incidents that it created or affected, so on and so forth. So there are investments that we're making constantly over there, and that's just, I feel like it's just going to be a wave that's going to take over and make security a lot more easy and a lot more simpler to do. But other than that, there's investments in Entra. These ones, this includes all of those different areas that I spoke about. There's continued investments into Intune. I think last year we announced the Intune suite, which has a bunch of new capabilities for customers to consider. Again, we continue to invest in Sentinel. So just from a Microsoft perspective, as a customer, maybe keeping this in mind, that we're only continuing to see growth from a security perspective. We're only going to continue investing more and more and more in terms of capabilities, in terms of AI. And so we have great partners like Marine Data Systems backing us as well. So, I think this is not going to slow down, and we're only going to continue to make, more progress here, more investments and more innovation down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone in this room is probably happy to hear that Microsoft will be making investments, especially as it relates to zero trust. As we look to wrap up this panel, there is one last question, and I think it's an important one. Daniel, I'm going to put you on the spot here, more on the advice side of it, but what are some of the notable cloud-based attacks you've observed in recent times, and what advice can you give to organizations looking to mitigate those threats?
So I wouldn't say cloud-based attacks, because I think everybody, right, we're in a hybrid environment. I would say 90%. But most recent, we saw these attacks in the Vegas casinos with MGM and stuff like that. So my advice is, train your employees, security awareness. Also, we have Jen that talked a little about that. It's just easy for a user to just click on one link. It just takes one click, and everything can come down. Backups are important. Encrypted backup, Kareem mentioned that also. So those are very important things that can help you come with a backup, can help you come back online once you have a breach.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some great advice, and it is a good way to tie in some of the other panels from earlier today. With that, I believe that wraps up this session. Oh, we have a question. Lisa.
Entra is GA, but Entra has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different solutions within it, out of which 3 are in public preview, right?
It's the 3 buckets that Sumi talked about, Microsoft Entra, because it's a portfolio of products. The network access piece is a new addition. So it's been handling identity protection, either emerging or not emerging, or as its core. And we just recently added the network access layer to the Entra portfolio that is heavily identity centric. And that's what is currently in public preview, with GA coming up scheduled for next year. So we have, that's the adding network access controls on top of identity. Yes. So they can talk to Maureen, Maureen, MDS, talk to your MDS consultant or rep. And obviously with me here today or Sumi for any of the private previews or public previews that we have. In addition to what's publicly available, there's plenty privately available. We just need to understand what your needs are, protecting private and internet apps, and then we'll learn what we can do.
Oh, all right. We got more questions. Let's start over there. You, yeah. I just don't know your name. I'm sorry. Oh, Bronwyn. Nice to meet you.
We have a different solution for CASB. I think it's Defender for Cloud Apps. Yeah.
And
I'm in Microsoft, but the names confuse me as well. So I'll just own up to that. Yeah.
It is a CASB solution. It is technically under the Entra portfolio.
Great, thank you. So going after Okta and Duo in that space.
It's providing solutions to help with the same use cases. Yeah.
I don't know, Patrick, you had a question up here?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same inquiry mode as Lisa over there. And I was curious, I heard you mention your emerging technology bucket, and I could have sworn I heard you said decentralized password store. Is that right?
No, decentralized IDs.
IDs, sorry.
Yes.
Decentralized IDs still is exciting. Like Lisa, how can we get our hands on that?
It's a GA capability. It's available to all Entra customers. It's free of charge. So, maybe reach out to me after, and I will connect you with SME who can help you get started.
Got it. We love the extensibility portion of that. It's
absolutely, and it's all open standard supported, it supports. We've got a whole bunch of use cases right now in some very regulated industries that we're working on as well with customers directly. So a whole lot of progress there. So if you want to get started on that, we'll help you out.
Heard it from the financial community. They're talking about in specifically crypto.
Yes,
that was something that came up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, is that out there? And apparently it is. So
yeah, absolutely. It's called Entra Verified ID. Yeah.
All right. Were there any other questions that I missed? Nope. All right. Well, with that, we thank everybody for their time here on the panel this afternoon. Hopefully the information was useful. And we're going to pass it off to Jen for the next introduction.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you, panelist. So up next, we have a panel on the crossroads of AI and security in government. Please welcome on stage our panelist, MDS Vice President of Federal, Mark Bortman, Senior Sales Director for Security Solution from Microsoft, Reese Zimmer, and Microsoft Director of Technical Sales, Lily DeVugan.